Hi everyone, you're viewing Cloud Ranger's Microsoft Azure training. I'm Sean Ismail, Cloud Architect with To-Do Lead, and that's my Twitter at Sean Ismail and my email at sean@cloudranger.net. And if you wish to connect, that's the LinkedIn info. So today is going to be the part 6 of Azure Cloud Services, and we're going to discuss some advanced configurations. There's going to be a lot of hands-on demo in this session. It's part of our entire Azure Cloud Services series, so if you have missed the previous sessions, the link is right down below the video. You can go and check it out from there. So let's get started. So the agenda for today is that we are going to talk about three different things. One is the multiple websites on a web role, and then we are going to discuss about running startup tasks in a role and restricting access to web role. So these three things will pretty much comprise of the entire session today. It's jam-packed. There's a lot of hands-on, so I hope you get to follow along. So let's get started. So the first thing is multiple websites on a web role. So far, whatever we have done in web services, we have created web roles, worker roles, and all in all, we have always worked on one website. And for most cases and production scenarios, this is probably the most ideal thing to do. You're going to size up the role or the virtual machine, as you know, to your requirements, depending on how much resources you want to consume, your usage, how many users are going to come and hit. So there's this entire scalability and performance thing that will go all the way for you to figure out what the size of your role is going to be. And on that role, you're going to have a website. And this website, again, based on all these performances, this is how this website will be created, or the resources of the virtual machines will be provided. Okay, so ideally that works out pretty well. Now, by default, the behavior is one website per web role as well. That's how Azure Cloud Services out of the box are configured, which means that hosting more websites so far, what we have gone through, I've learned, would be like, let's spin up another web role to host sort of another website. Means you are spinning up more virtual machines. So the good news is there are multiple. There are many ways to have multiple websites that can be hosted on a web role. End of the day, it's basically IIS. It's no different from you going on the IIS and creating another website. But we know that the web role is a virtual machine and you have access to that virtual machine, so you can go on the IS and do all of that. But would you really want to do that? If that's what you want to do and that's what the requirements are for you to go in and do all such things, maybe you should not be using web services, but rather be using infrastructure as a service, where you bring up your own virtual machine, install your IIS, and do your own thing. The idea of web services was to be, it's going to be seamless. There should be a nice flow where things happen in the back end and you don't have to do that, right? But for whatever reason, if you really need to host multiple websites, do not go in manually and do that. There are ways to do this in a web role, and that's what I'm going to get to right now. So adding multiple websites is done on the service definition file. So as you know, there's going to be service configuration and service definition file in a in a cloud service. So in the CSDEF file, or the service definition file, we are going to basically just go add a couple of lines, and that will be it. You can host as many websites as you want. Obviously, like I mentioned, the performance, scalability, or something you need to consider. So I have a little excerpt here from the service definition file. And as you can see, by default, when you create the web service in, for example, Visual Studio, it will show you the site name as web. So, and this is the binding for that web, right? So this is the default one we have seen so far. The only thing I did over here was add another element of site to, add another site in there. So what I did was create another one here, site name. I gave it a name. Here it was web by default. I just called it new Ranger web. And it looks for a physical directory where it's going to take the website from. So this physical directory is not on the web server. This physical directory is basically a directory where you're creating this web service, or where Visual Studio is running, for example, to go in and package from this folder that website and upload it to the web role. And basically the endpoint, so the binding is to the endpoint. And here you can see the binding name is going to be endpoint as well. I'm keeping all the way same. But I'm putting in a host header and I'm just calling it rangerwebsite.cloudranger.net. So I'm going to go into more details in that when we go through the demo, and I'll explain why I'm doing what I'm doing here. But this is as simple as adding this element here, or this tag here, site name, and pretty much add the secondary web role. So I mean, add the secondary website. So let's go ahead and look at this from our client machine, and you can follow along and try to do this on your end as well. So here I am in Visual Studio. I'm going to go ahead and create a new project, stuff that we have done before. So I'm not going to explain a whole lot in here. If you have missed, if you have just stumbled up on this session and you have missed anything, go ahead and watch those first. Then this will make a lot of sense where I explain how to do this in Visual Studio. So my web role, as usual, I'm going to go name it something different. I'm going to call it Ranger Web Role 1. I'm not going to have any worker role. I'm going to select an empty template for the site. This obviously takes a little bit of time to spin around, so I'm pausing in between. So if you're watching this, this might happen a little bit faster than if you're following along. So give it some time. Okay, so looks like everything's loaded. So the first thing I wanted to go to was the service definition file where we make these changes, right? So let's go to the service definition file here. And as you can see, this is what I was referring to. It's created for you web by default. And the endpoint over here is called endpoint one. And in the input endpoint 1 is actually basically port 80. Okay, so let's go ahead and first publish this. And I want to start showing you the differences of how to do this when you add the second one and the differences you're going to notice. So I'm going to click on the cloud service over here, go publish. This is my subscription. It's asking to create a cloud service and a storage account. So I'm going to just call this Ranger Web 01, for example. I am East US 2, locally redundant. So this will create the cloud service as well as the storage. All right, once that's done, everything else looks okay over here. I'm going to enable the remote desktop for this role. And the reason for that is I want to show you the difference or whatever comes up on IIS after logging in. So I'm going to give an username and password in here. Click on OK. Hit on publish. And I'm going to come back once everything is published. As you know, this is going to take a little bit of time. Um, yeah, I just realized I should have probably created a default page, but that's okay. We'll do that the second round. Alrighty, looks like this one's deployed. Let's go to the Azure portal here, go to all resources. I'm looking for the cloud service. We are going to go and log into the web role VM there. So let's try this. Once everything's loaded here, let's go down here. I want to go to the Ranger web role. Double click on this. Should show connect up here. So this is how you connect to the web role virtual machine. Let's open this one up. Connect. Put in the password we had put in earlier. Don't ask me this. Yes. What I'm trying to show you over here is actually go to IIS and show you that single site that got created. I know I've done this long time ago in the previous sessions, not long time ago, to show you how it looks, but I just want to show this thing to you once again. So when we create the second one, it should actually come out more clear. All right, we'll load it up here. Let's go to start and search for IIS. That should show up pretty instantly. Run as admin over here. So this is what I wanted to show you here. Let me expand this. Okay, open up here. Nope. So these are the sites, and we should see one site here. So this is the site that is there right now. That got created when we deployed this package or did whatever deployment we did from Visual Studio for the web role. So as I promised here, if I come back over here, I want to do one more thing because right now, if we go to browse this thing, we should not see anything. Yeah, because I did not deploy any pages or anything to it. Let's come to Ranger Web Role 1 here. I want to add a new item, put an HTML page. We'll just call this default.html, add. I'm hoping that's added over here, default.html. Okay, I'm going to republish this. You could have done this. I mean, I could have done this earlier. I just forgot to do this. Um, so I can go ahead and publish. It's going to republish this, and what it's going to do is it's going to publish this with that HTML page, so we can go to that website, and actually it will show you something a little bit better than this runtime header when you go to that URL. And I just want to keep this aligned because the next step is going to be when we actually go and create the second site, so it will be quite easier to distinguish between these two. So let this happen, and I'll come back when it's all sorted out. So it threw up this little deployment environment in use, and that's okay. I want to replace the content there. It's basically saying that, hey, this deployment is already in use. Do you want to replace it? Let's go ahead and click OK. So if you go get that, just click OK, and it should be all right. Okie dokie, so that completed. So if I come over here and refresh this, uh, let's try default.html. Okay, that page showed up. I'm assuming what was not done was is website 1. What was not done was published without any content. All right, that's fine. So the next time we republish this, we will see the first website showing this is website 1. Now, let's go back to service definition 5 here and try to achieve what we are trying to achieve here. We have a single site here called web, and the binding is going to port 80. So I'm going to go ahead and try to create another site in here, the second website, okay? Let's copy this from here so I have the structure with me. I'm going to call this site, so it's all under the same sites, okay? So it's all here. I'm going to call this new Ranger web, okay? The other thing I'm going to change over here is the binding. In the binding, I'm going to leave it the same. It's going to be port 80. So just because the binding is going to be the same with port 80, I do not want to use like port 8080 or anything which is not standard. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and change the, I'm going to add this host header. Let's see here. I'm going to put a host header in there, and I'm going to call it Ranger website.cloudranger.net. Okay, so that's one thing I'm going to do. So what will happen on IIS is that when people request this, since they bought it on port 80, this is not going to port 80, this is not going to be conflicting any longer. It will look at the host header, even though it's going on port 80, and it will go and pick up on this one. So I'll show you what happens in IIS when you do that. The other thing I'm going to do over here is I'm going to say where the site is. So in my temp folder on my local computer, I created a folder called Ranger Web 101 or whatever. And if you go in there, I created a default.html page over there. This default page is nothing really. It just says this is Ranger Web. I'll just call it Ranger Web 2. Okay, so this shows us that we are actually on Web 2. Now, what I'm going to do over here is pick this up, and in Ranger Web site name, I'm going to say physical directory where this is located, and I'm going to paste that in there. I'm going to say pick up the content from here. And so this site, the default one and this one, those were the only difference. I'm adding the physical directory here and I'm adding the host header here. And in our previous site, which I should have done before, I'm going to just add this content on default.html that I created. So we know that, they're going to be all right. So let's see, site name and site over here. I've done the bindings, binding closed over here as well. So let's see what's going on here. Okay, looks like, oh, I see what the problem is here. Okay, there are too many sites in here. So this is the site and this closes here. So I need to remove this. So then I'll have two sites in here under the sites. That should remove all the others. Sites, site one, site two, closing the tag here, closing the tag here. Yeah, I think that should do it. There is no other error over here. You have to be very careful when you edit this. Anyways, let's try to publish all this now. So let's come to Cloud Service here, go to Publish. Everything is going to be same. It's just that we added something over here. Let's go Publish. And I'm going to pause and come back. Okay, we could replace this as well. A bunch of things are going to happen. So there's one interesting thing that is going on in the backend over here. While this happens, I want to show you. How exactly are we going to be accessing this site? Well, let's see. Let's close all my other deployments. There's only one that's running right now. Let that run here. Okay, so we know that we are going to access the previous site, the original site we had, we were going to just access through rangerweb01.cloudapp.net. The second site, how do you add it on the same server? I actually went and put a host header there. Okay, so I'm expecting the traffic, the web traffic, to come in through this request. So in the backend, what I did was I went to cloudranger.net public DNS and I added in an IP address. The same IP address that actually points over here, cloudapp.net. So how do you find out this IP address of your web role? You can come over here and you can see that on the Azure portal that this is the URL rangerweb01, so rangerweb01.cloudapp.net, and this is the public IP address, right? This is the public IP address. There's other way to find this out as well. So if you go to the command prompt, let's go ahead and ping rangerweb01.cloudapp.net. And it should show you the same address. It can ping it or not. It should actually translate that 137.116.85.198. So in my DNS for my DNS for cloudranger.net, I created a subdomain called Ranger website, and I created an A record. Okay, it's not CNAME, an A record, and pointed to the same IP address because end of the day, rangerweb01.cloudapp.net or Ranger website.cloudranger.net, they all should point to the same web role IP address over here. And they all will go on port 80 by default. What will differentiate is when it goes Ranger Web Cloud App.net, it has no host header. And if I go through this one, it will actually have this host header, and people who worked with IIS, they know when you put a host header, you can use the same port once again. So I actually had to do that in the backend. So if you are following along and you are using a custom domain name to do that, make sure you go and update that domain name, create an A record at this point, and point to this IP address. And sometimes this takes time. Uh, the DNS host provider I use does it in a couple of minutes, but depending on how traffic is your end, it might take a couple of hours. So I've rarely seen it take a couple of hours these days, but it still can take some time. So just be aware of that. It is still updating over here, so I'll pause and come back when both sites are up. All right, so this completed right now. Let's go to our original site here. What's going on here? Okay, click on this. Let's refresh. This is website one. Okay, this is website one. We now have content in there. Alrighty, so let's come over here. Ranger website, this is the host name. So I am hoping to come over here and do HTTP and do this. And it should say, let's do this default.html. Ah, looks like the DNS is not resolved yet. Give me a sec here. Yeah, it looks like the DNS is taking a little bit of time. The best way to find this is if I go and do ping ranger website.cloudranger.net. It can't even find it. Okay, we'll give this a couple of more minutes. All right, I kept pinging over here to see actually at a point when it starts resolving it. So it looks like it resolved it right now. So let's come back to our website here, hit enter. All right, so this is Ranger Web 2. So if you look at this, this was website 1 where we went with the cloudapp.net, and here we went with the hostname that we entered within Visual Studio over here. So we now have two sites on the same web role here. So let's log into the machine, which we still have here running, and refresh this. And as you can see, as we refreshed it on IIS, now you have the new Ranger Web, the one that got created. So we have two websites that are hosted on the same IIS over here. And if you go over here, this will make so much sense to IIS guys here. If we go to bindings, you can see that that host name was over here, right? So this is what came from the Visual Studio. This is what makes IIS work on port 80 with multiple sites. Okay, this is a little bit beyond what we are trying to do right now, but that's how you have two websites that are hosted on the same web role. Pretty simple. Just add the tag over here, make sure all the background work, DNS and everything else is done, and you're good to go. Okay, so that concludes this topic. Let's move on to the next one. All right, so let's talk about running startup tasks in a role, and what is that all about? So what a startup task does is that you can actually perform certain tasks when the role starts. So when we are publishing this or when we are turning on our cloud service and publishing anything on that, the role starts. And if you want the role to do something, or let's say the virtual machine to do something just before it starts, you can have a startup tasks do that for you. And in the server world or in a virtual machine world, this is not something that's too complicated. Very easily done with a script. Uh, it's there are many ways to do that. However, in cloud service, to automate this or to streamline this in the concept of or paradigm of a cloud service, it's quite interesting how you do that, right? And it's a unique feature of Azure Cloud Services as well. I mean, this whatever the startup task is very it's very specific to how the cloud service is. Websites or virtual machines, they have their own way of doing that in Azure as well. And as usual, startup tasks are defined in service definition files, and we'll see that momentarily when I work on one. And startup tasks are basically batch files. So you basically have a batch file that fires up as soon as the role or the virtual machine starts. It could also be a console app, but most importantly, if it's a batch file, you can make it do anything. You can make it run PowerShell scripts, you can make it run any application in the background with any sort of privileges to do anything, right? So it's quite powerful in what it does. But end of the day, it's nothing but it's a mechanism for running something before a role starts. So the way you do that in definition file, you basically put in a startup tag in there, like this element startup. You basically say where the batch file is and how you want to run it and what kind of task it is. And of course, the batch file has to do something that that's going to be important or that's something you want to do, right? So I have a sample of a batch file here where all I'm doing is taking the current time and logging it to startuplog.txt. And basically, every time the role starts, it goes and logs to that file, so I can see what this log file. I mean, whenever the role was restarted or the role started itself. So that's how you basically do it. It's pretty simple to do. So let's go to our client machine and try to actually get this task up and running and see what it can do. Okay, to save some time here, I went to my client machine. I created a new project called Azure Cloud Services 1. And in here, I've done really nothing. So there's just a web role called Ranger Web Role. This is similar to what I just did earlier in the previous demonstration, right? The only thing in here is that I went to the service definition file and I added this tag over here. So I'm putting the startup over here. I'm saying that this task, the command line is going to be, this is like basically my, the command line file or the batch, it could be a batch file script or whatever. I'm saying that it's going to be in scripts folder. And let me explain that in a bit. And I'm saying the execution of this is elevated. So what I'm trying to say over here is that it's going to have a higher privilege to run this command line over here. And it's a simple task, okay? So that's all that there is to it to actually run this while when the role starts. So what I went ahead and did on my computer here, let me close this stuff from our previous session. Come over here. Um, I have something over here called startup.cmd. And if I edit that, you can see that that's all I was doing. I'm taking the current time, I'm echoing to startup.log.txt file. So I'm writing it to the startup.log.txt file. Okay. And then it's just exiting the script gracefully. And what we need to do over here is that come to Ranger role, web role here. I created a folder here called scripts just because I said I want to keep all my scripts together. So the way this happens is you come to Ranger web role here, right click on that, and you go to add, and you add a new folder. That's all you do. And you create a script over here, script folder. In the script folder, you right click and you go add, and you add a new item or existing item there. So I added an existing item over here, and I basically came over here and pointed to the CMD file, right? Because the CMD file was an existing item that I had created. You can add many other things to a folder while you're uploading this, but I just said that I want to put this startup over there. Click on the startup file, and this is something you have to remember. Basically, the CMD file over here, let's actually close this. Uh, I'm going to delete this and show this once again. Come over here, add existing item, go to desktop, pick this up from there, click on add. If I go over here, that shows the batch file. So, okay, everything is over here. One thing you have to do is click on this. By default, it says do not copy. You see this copy to output directory here? I want this to copy always. So what I'm trying to say is that whenever you're packaging and deploying this, that file should be deployed every time. So copy this file every time. And that's just because if I change this CMD file here, I want that change to be reflected as well. But anyways, that's all you need to do. Do not forget to change this over here. Copy to output directory, copy always. And over here, you put the startup tag exactly the way you see over here. The execution is elevated because some of the scripts, they could require elevated privileges to run. And if it requires elevated privilege to run and you are not doing that, then it's not going to work. The script is just going to fail. So I'm going to show you over here. Um, let's see if it actually shows up. So there are two options there, limited or elevated, right? So I have chosen the elevated task, the execution context here. Okay, so let's go ahead and publish this, and we are going to go to the VM itself or the role itself, and we'll see what's happening there. Okay, so it is going to ask me to create a cloud service and storage account. Let me call this Ranger Web 001. East US2, locally redundant storage. Let's try this. Everything looks okay over here. Well, I do want to enable the remote settings here. Actually, let's go and try that again. Sean. Oops. Put in a password. Just a basic web role that we always create. Nothing fancy. Okay. So yeah, so I'll be back once this has deployed and we can log into the virtual machine. Alrighty, this just completed. Let's go to all resources here. Click on this, all resources. We should find our Ranger Web 001 over here. I'm trying to log into the virtual machine. Let's load this up. Okay, it's loaded. Let's go double click on the role here. Should see a connect button momentarily. Connect. Okay, this loading. I'll come back once it gets to the desktop. Okay, now that we are logged into the virtual machine, there's a couple of things I want to show you here. Let's go to the Explorer. The first thing I want to show you here is local disk E, not the C, the local disk E over here. If you go in there, you should see something called as the AppRoot folder. If you double click on this, do you remember this one? This is where the package actually uploaded everything. So if you go to the scripts, you'll see the startup script was uploaded here on the virtual machine. Okay, so the content of that is all uploaded here. Let's go back and see if the script did what it's supposed to do. Go to C drive. Yep. So it created the startup log. Let's go in there, and the current time is whatever it picked up from the local time on the VM. Okay. So it looks like our script was uploaded and it was executed as well. So that's how you do it. It's very simple. You just come over here and create the startup task. You make sure that you do the little things I talked about over here to make sure that the startup script actually is uploaded. All right. So let's move on to our next topic where we will actually show you something. I mean, I'll show you something that depends on this a little bit. All right. Let's go to the slides. Alrighty. So the next thing in advanced configurations I'm going to talk about is restricting access to the web role. So by default, and this is what you want, that's why it's by default, all IP addresses in this world are allowed to access your site. So the site that we just created, you can be anywhere in the world and your users should be able to access it. That's what websites are for. But there might be some security or business reasons that this default setting is not desired for your scenario. You might want to do this because you have a website that you only want a certain office in your organization with their IP addresses to log into or to view. Okay, this is definitely not anything like these days you might be able to do this with access control list on your edge device like firewall or something like that. But this is what is done through cloud services. There is a way to do this, and that's what this section is all about. The way you do that is obviously there is some setting that you need to do on the web config as well as on the service definition file. But this section actually depends on what we did in our last section, right? With the startup command. So once you have deployed your web role, you log into the virtual machine and you will go to the server manager and you will enable an IS role feature called IP address and domain restriction. That's the first thing you'll do on the VM. Then this is something we just did. We ran a script which was, sort of writing down the date and time. But what you need to do is as soon as the role starts, you want it to go and enable the IP security feature or unlock the IP security feature on the web server. And what this will do in the system web server, this is the web config file. The developer will most likely write this for you. I'll show you how to do this, but anyways, he'll go in and put in there and say which IP address is going to be allowed to view that. So this sort of ties in with all the things we have done in this session. So I'm going to go like straight to the demonstration and show you how to do that with the current one that we have. Okay, so this is where we were just working right now. If you remember the scripts, the startup command. So we're going to do something similar, except that this time I'm going to change the script to do something else. The script this time is actually going to run this command when the role starts, just because the IP security needs to be read or I mean, it's going to pick up the configuration from the web.config file and take the IP security section from there. So this is actually a practical scenario where you need a startup script for doing something when the role starts, right? So, I mean, it's definitely a little bit more intuitive than our date and time. I mean, this could have been a script which does a lot of things. Anyways, this is what we want to do. So I'm going to take the script, and this one is called startup IIS. So let's go change our one over here. Um, I'm going to keep everything the same. I'm not going to take the startup command over here. Let's delete that. What I'm going to do over here is come and add an existing item. And what I'm going to do is pick on the startup IIS one. Okay. So now we know that this will be the one that will be executed when the web role starts. So obviously I need to change the startup over here. I'm going to call this startup dash IIS. So this is what my script is now called. So this is what the startup will be. And before I do that, let's go to the web role here. If you remember, I said that before anything else, you need to go to the server manager and enable a feature, I mean, a role feature here. So let's go to manage, add role and feature. Oops, it's still collecting. Add role and feature. And in here, go next, choose the local server, go next. Oops. In server roles, I want to come down over here and you can see IIS is already installed. So I'm going to expand that and go to web server. In web server, there should be security here. Let's go get that. And the one that I'm looking for is IP and domain restrictions. If you do not enable this, it's basically not going to work. That's because you will not have the right IIS components that will be able to read out of the web config file and enable that feature to actually restrict any IP addresses. Okay, so let's go. I'm going to pause and wait for this to finish. All right, so the feature installation has completed here. So we'll get out of the virtual machine at this point. We don't need anything over here. So the only thing that's left to do is publish this again. Okay, so let's go over here. And I didn't want to hit on that, but okay, let's close that. What I want to do over here is show you one more thing. Let's go to the web config file here. So right now, when we go to this site, let's load this again. I think I did have a startup file there. Do I have a default HTML file? This is a test, right? So if we go to, I'm publishing this as what? Forgot. I'm publishing this as Ranger Web 001. Okay, so if I go to, and this was already published, so if I do Ranger Web 001.cloudapp.net, this is a test. Obviously, my IP is currently allowed, so I'm seeing the web page show up. So the whole goal is to now restrict IP addresses. So the way you do that is come to the web.config file. And in web.config file, you need to go to system.webserver. So I already have that on the slide, so I copied it from there. And in this here, in here, all I'm saying in the web config file is that do not allow anything that's unlisted. Okay, so unlisted, allow unlisted is false. So you have to be allowed. And I'm saying add allowed to true, and I'm saying the only the IP address that will be allowed is this. So the way I could test this is that I put in an IP address that's not mine. So I can go to this website right now, but once I have done this, since this is not my IP address, I'll not be allowed. My access will be denied. So I'll take this and put this over here. System.web. Yeah, I'll just put this on system.web server. Okay, so web config file. This is where you change that or mention which IP addresses are allowed. Okay, let's go ahead and publish this right now. Do not forget to do that web config part. I almost did. So let's go and try to publish this now. Click on publish. It'll try to publish the whole thing. Obviously, the changes it'll prompt with that little box saying that, hey, it's already running. Do you want to replace it? And I'm going to say yes. So let's wait for that. So while I was running this, I just want to show you something because I forgot to do this, even though I mentioned that. Cannot find the file name. I want to show you this over here. It tried to deploy it and it did not find it. And the reason it did not is because when I added this, I forgot to do copy to output directory. So what it did was it was looking for it in the upload directory and didn't find it. That's why it did that. Okay, so do not forget to do that. I just wanted to come back here and show these are the mistakes that one can make. And if you do not do that, those are the problems that will come through. Anyways, but that's good for Visual Studio. It actually shows you the error and what's going on. So let's see, the build has started. All right, it's asking us if you want to replace this, and I say yes, and it should start. So I'm going to come back once this is completely done. Alrighty, so this is done. So technically, if everything worked out, I should not have access anymore to this site. So let's refresh this. All right, so I do not have access to the site anymore. You can see it's error 403, which is access is denied from the web server. And obviously the reason behind that is if we go to my web config file, the best way to test this out was for me to go and put in an IP address that does not belong to me. So my IP address is not here. My public IP address is not here, so it does not belong to me. In fact, right now, anyone going to this site who does not have this IP, which is very specific, right? I mean, I could have put a range over here as well through subnet mask, but if you look at the subnet mask and people who understand networking say it's a all the way 24-bit mask, right? So it's 255, 255, 255, and 255. So actually, it's a 32-bit mask, so it covers the entire IP address. There's no range here. This IP address, this subnet over here means there's no range. It has to be this specific IP address. So basically what we did in this section is that we used that startup script thing to enable a feature, to go and read the, enable a feature to go and read the web.config file for this information every time a role starts, and enabled a role feature on the server itself to actually make this all happen. And then we also went and wrote the service definition over here to run that script to make this happen. All right, so that pretty much concludes this session, and let's go back to our slides here. So in this session, we started off with one having multiple websites on a web role and the reasons one would do that and how to do that. And then I have demonstrated how to go and do startup scripts in roles. And there might be various reasons why you would want to do that. Have a role startup and run a script and do multiple things. And then the last one I showed how to, enable a feature through which you can restrict client access or different IP addresses to access your site, including the startup script to actually do that. Okay, so as usual, our training site is cloudranger.net /Azure training. The YouTube is where you're probably watching this right now. It's Cloud Ranger Network. My Twitter handle is @Sean Ismail, and email is sean@cloudranger.net. And if you wish to connect on LinkedIn, that's the URL right there. Um, I am falling behind a little bit on the email responses, but I'll be getting on them as soon as possible. I know some of you have emailed for different things. Twitter is a place to get actually updates on when other sessions are coming in, or the best thing to would be to subscribe to YouTube channel. I think that's the best way. Do leave comments. I see a lot of people leaving comments, and I try to respond there as well. Um, what I'm planning to do is add the slide section over here. So a lot of people email me asking me why the slides are. I do not send the slides any longer through email because they're on SlideShare. So you can actually look for Cloud Ranger on SlideShare and you can find that from there. My next slide, I'm going to put actually that link over here. I have to manually post that on the videos or on the comment section if anybody used to ask. So I'll put that over there. So till then, I wish that you all get through your exams. A lot of people have sent me emails regarding their exams and the concerns and everything else. I'm really hoping that you go get through. And I'll see you in my next session.